Hi, this is Coralla Ficklin at CorallaFicklin.com, WelcomeNetwork.com, Welcome.com, iStudyGuides.com, iStudyGuides.com, iStudyCards.com, and other websites that you can find when you go into one of those, Coralla Ficklin or Welcome or Explain, ASKPLAIN. Okay, we were talking about irregular verbs, and that in the simple present tense, most verbs are regular. There are exceptions. For example, you have the verb to be, you have the verb to go, you have the verb to do, you have can and may and would, and some of these are not simple present tense because they're auxiliaries, and should. Okay, but you do have verbs that are irregular in English. Let's not fool ourselves. But they're mostly irregular when you're talking about the simple past tense or the perfect tenses. And the perfect tenses are the tenses with the verb to have. For example, I'm hungry, so let's say I have eaten. Or I haven't eaten, let's say, but I have eaten. I would have eaten. I will have eaten. I had eaten. Speaking of the verb to have, that's another verb that's irregular in almost all its tenses. The progressive tenses, almost no verb is irregular. Sometimes you have to drop that E in spelling, but as far as the verb itself, but the verb to have in the present tense, simple present tense, is irregular. I, you, we, they, have. Remember I said in the other video, the irregularity is not with the I, you, we, they. The irregularity is with the he, she, it. And he, she, it has. H-A-S. Okay. Now, there are a lot of irregular verbs in the past tense. I like language. I like to study English, which is my language, but I also like to study other languages too. I'm especially fascinated with the Germanic languages because English is a Germanic language. It's not a Latin-based language, although it has thousands upon thousands of Latin-based words, and most of the prefixes and suffixes, roots, and to a certain extent suffixes, are from Latin words, classical Latin, classical Greek, and vulgar or medieval Latin. But I'm fascinated with like Norwegian and Swedish and German, because if you look at the core of English, that's where the core of English comes from, from where the core of English. That's the core of the language. Some of the most important verbs in English are irregular in the past tense and in the perfect tenses. It's something that you can't run away from. Just like in English, you can't run away from the subjunctive in Spanish and in French and in Italian and Portuguese. Right? You can't run away from this. And the reason that these verbs are so important, because they're part of the core of the English language. The core. And the core of the English language those words have been a part of English since 900, some of them since 800. Most of them long before the Norman Conquest in 1066. If you go into the website, and then I've written a number of books, and in one of the books that I've written, in the back of it, the book on the body, in the back of each, because they come in sections, in the back of each book on the body, There are things that show you cognates, English cognates in German and Norwegian and in Dutch and in Danish, but also it is etymology of irregular verbs in English and when they came into the language. And many verbs that are irregular came into English or had come into English long before 1150. 1150 is important because that's when England broke off from Normandy, the part of France. It's French and English history, which is not important, but they've been in the language for a very long time. And those verbs that have been in English for a very long time, they have remained irregular. They have remained irregular. Verbs that have come into the English language much more recently, even if they come in from a foreign language, the way that verb is made into the past, you just add an ed and life goes on. But you can't add an ed when you're talking about the verb to write. You can't say write it. It's wrote. And the past tense is written. You can't add an ed when the verb is fight. It's not fighted. The past tense is fought. And the past perfect is, and the perfect tense is, the perfect form, is fought. You can't add an ed, and I'm looking right now at the verb, at the site where these verbs are, and I'm looking at those verbs which entered into English language prior to 1150. You can't add an ed when you're talking about the verb to bite. To bite, when a dog bites you, right? You can't add an ed and say bite it or bite. The past tense is bit. He bit me yesterday. The dog bit me yesterday. Or the past perfect, because sometimes there's a change. The past perfect is bitten. So, with the little bit of time that I have left, let me just give you some ways that you can learn these verbs. These verbs are very important in English. They're some of the most important verbs, if not the most important verbs in the English language. And just like it's important if you speak English that you have to learn how to speak Spanish correctly, so you're going to have to learn what the AR verbs are, the ER verbs, and the IR verbs. In English, it's a little bit easier for you, not the pronunciation, but the sentence structure, the structure of the verb. You have to learn the three forms. These are irregular verbs. The three forms of the verb, if they're irregular. You have the simple form. That's the form of the verb without the to. So let's look at it. You have the verb, like I said, I'm hungry, so let's look at the verb to eat. So you have the verb to eat. The simple form is eat. The past tense of the verb to eat is ate. Just like ate, ate. The perfect form, that's the one with I would have or I have, is eaten. Some verbs have three forms. Some verbs have only two. For example, if you have the verb to fight, the simple form is fight, the past form is fought, and the participle is the perfect form, or the past participle. It's not called the perfect form, it's called the past participle. The past participle is fought. So sometimes you only have to worry about two forms, sometimes you have to worry about three forms. Whatever it is, you do. So in the next tape that I make, next video, let's look at some of the verbs, and let's look at some of their forms, and let's look at how you go about learning this very important aspect of the English language. So Kerala Ficklin at keralaficklin.com, welcomenetwork.com.